He's a, he's a software developer and educator from Montreal, Canada. He is amateur pianist and a cat person. He started tinkering with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript back in 2007 and never stopped. He has worked as a software developer for organizations like Khan Academy, DigitalOcean, and Gatsby. He's also taught web development fundamentals at Concordia bootcamps. In 2020, he went independent, creating online courses through his own custom platform, and his courses, CSS for JavaScript developers and The Joy of React, have impacted tens of thousands of developers. And now I'll head over to Josh.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. This is just a lot of fun to be here. It's actually really cool just to see how many people are participating in the chat. Like, I've been to a lot of these sorts of events, and it's rare that people are so engaged. It's also, I have a bookcase behind me that has Don't Make Me Think, and it's a fantastic book. So cool to see that that's part of the reading list. I'm also, like you may notice, like the camera is there and I'm looking over here, and that's because I have this complicated monitor set up. So this is where I can actually see myself and the other people. Just in case that's strange, let me share my screen. And yeah, the reason for that is that my main screen has the slides that I'll be sharing. Yeah, it's, let me go ahead. I should also say, I probably have like 20 minutes-ish of slides. So the hope is that there will be lots of questions, because I'm happy to spend a good chunk of the time answering questions. So let me keep going. I also have a slide with my info, but Violina did such a good job introducing me that I don't really have to. So we can skip right over that, which is cool. Yeah, what am I here to talk about? I want to share what I've learned about starting a career in tech, both from my own experience, but also from the experience that I have doing career coaching. So when I worked at Concordia bootcamps, one of the things that I would do is when people graduate from that, and it was a typical, I think it was a 9 or 10 week bootcamp program, 9 or 10 weeks full-time or 8 months part-time. And that's the part-time one where I would teach, but I would do career coaching with both groups. And so I coached quite a few people and helped them land their first job after finishing the bootcamp. And that's going to inform a good amount of what I talk about here today. I also want to talk about building an audience and how it can open all sorts of doors. It's been a pretty big part of my own story. Certainly, I worry sometimes that there's like pressure that everybody has to be like a tech influencer, and that's certainly not the case. You don't need to be on any social networks if you don't want to, but I do think it can be a helpful thing, so I want to talk about it. I also want to touch on how to learn effectively, because this is something that I've learned a lot about myself. And as the last bullet point says, anything you want. So that's, in the question period afterwards, if you have questions about stuff that I haven't talked about here, I'm happy. Just feel free to ask whatever you want. Getting your first job. And you'll notice there is an asterisk here, and that asterisk is doing a lot of work, because this is all based on my own experience and my experience career coaching. Take everything I'm going to say with a grain of salt, because I think I know a good amount about this stuff, but I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm not like the biggest expert in this kind of thing. So just some observations that I hope you'll mix in with things that you've heard from other people. And if something I say doesn't sound quite right, like, use multiple sources, and you can feel free to leave whatever doesn't feel particularly applicable to your situation. I should also say, I noticed all the different countries that people are from. I've only really worked in North America, both in Canada and the US. And so take that into consideration too, that I don't really know how much things differ from one place to another. But yeah, with all those caveats out of the way, one of the things that I really tried to stress with the people that I would coach, and this advice that I was giving would conflict with advice from other career coaches. Hopefully it doesn't conflict with anything that you've heard from Women Who Code. But again, if it does, please don't assume that I'm right. I might not be. But the advice that I disagree with is that it's a numbers game, that you want to be hitting 10, 15, 20 applications a day, and you want to be like firing them off, right? Like just getting as many applications out there, almost like you're playing the lottery and you're just trying to get as many lottery tickets in as you can. And the reason I don't agree with that advice is that there's a person, when someone's hiring, they don't just like grab a random resume out of the stack and say, oh, this person gets the job. There's a person receiving your application. And if you play it this way, where you apply to the largest number of jobs with the lowest effort per application, you're likely to not get many offers. And if you do, you're going to get like the least appealing jobs because it's the jobs where they're not, there aren't people that are putting in higher effort applications. And granted, like, a lot of it's not like the application itself is the thing that you're being judged on necessarily. It's, your resume, your experience, all of that is obviously more important than like how nice the application is. But it does go to show that I think that putting effort into an application is really appreciated. I used to work at a company called Unsplash, and Unsplash was a really small company. And like at the time, our front end team was me. It was just me, but most of the time it was like 2 or 3 people. And so when I was leaving, I was put in charge of hiring my replacement, which is also a really weird position to be in because people would join the interview. You'd have to say like, well, I'm leaving. You're going to be doing what I'm doing now. You're taking my job. But the thing that I noticed is that 95% of the applications that we were getting had it was very clear that there was less than 5 minutes put into this application. And the result is that when people did spend like 20 minutes or 30 minutes on the application, you really notice them. It would there's, the templated cover letter, for example, where you can tell very much that like they have a single cover letter. They swap out the name of the company, maybe like the industry. So it'll read like, hi, my name is Josh and I'm interested in the graphics industry. And you can tell that like graphics is just the word that they swapped in for this particular application. I think it makes sense to spend some time on the cover letter and to make it personalized for the company that you're applying to. And I thought it'd be fun. I can share some of the cover letters that I've written that have led to me getting job offers. And again, the cover letter is not the only piece of the puzzle, right? The best cover letter in the world won't help if the company is looking for 5 years of experience and you only have 1 year, although you should still apply to jobs like that because you never know. And often people are really ambitious with their requirements. But all I mean to say is that the cover letter is obviously not the only factor that matters. This is a letter I wrote to a company called DigitalOcean, which was a company I worked at in 2019 or 2020. And I'm not gonna, I'll share these links, by the way. So if you'd like to go through all of this, you can. But very quickly, I'll just kind of go through this as an outline. I mentioned that I work for Khan Academy, which is where I worked at the time. I talk about my own experience with DigitalOcean and why I think their mission is cool, like the fact that they make it easy to do things that have typically been very hard for people that don't have a lot of experience with servers. So this paragraph is sort of like why I want to work for the company. And then I have some bullet points about why the company should want to work with me. So I'm highlighting the things that I've done, the skills that I have that are relevant for this job, linking to some of my open source projects, all that kind of stuff. It's a bit long. If I was writing this today, I'd probably try to tighten this up a little bit. But it's clear that like this is not like my template cover letter where I've copy pasted server provisioning in, right? Like it's written specifically for this company. I also, I went through and found their, I should have made this clearer here because it's not actually that clear, but I went through their company values because companies like to publish their company values. And I found there were 5 or 6 of them. I found the one that I really liked and I included their company value in my cover letter to show that I've done like a little bit of research. Oh, this only is just one. Where are the others? Oh, you know what? I recently added this to one of my courses and I guess I edited this. I wonder if I can, Zoom UI is in the way. Yeah, because I was actually, as I started going this, I thought, wait a minute. There should have been, it should have been in the opposite order to go from my earliest one to my later one. Restore this version. Let's go back in time. Okay, so that was my most recent cover letter. I had meant to go through these others, but really the point that I'm trying to make here is that they're all very different from one another. Like if we compare that to my first one, and this text is kind of small, let me make it bigger. And let me move the Zoom UI back. For Khan Academy, which is a company I really wanted to work for, I talked about my own history, essentially creating, I don't know why the formatting is all messed up, my own experience being interested in education. Actually, the first web application I ever built was a course platform similar to what Khan Academy offers. So I mentioned that. I mentioned that I had this friend who was working as a tutor. It was actually my boyfriend, but I didn't want to be that open on this cover letter. And talked about how I built this thing. It wasn't very good, but it did have sort of all the bones of a typical application. And then eventually, someone mentioned Khan Academy to me. I discovered that this platform existed, and it was almost exactly what I wanted to build. It was so good. It was essentially what I wanted to do, but like turned into a real thing. And so, again, there's 0 sentences in common between this cover letter and my DigitalOcean one. It's very clear that I wrote this for this company. And I do think that did help me stand out from the group of people that had been applying to this job. I also did a bit of contributing to their open source projects. And I met somebody at a hackathon who worked there. So I pestered him to like mention me to the people going through the resume piles. And those 3 things together, I think, were a big help, because Khan Academy typically only hires people with like advanced college degrees, and I never went to college. I was one of 2 people in a company of like 150 people that didn't have a college degree. Yeah, so cover letters. And again, I'll share this at the end if you want to go through them in more detail. Another thing, I think, and I should also, I don't know if I said this, most of what I'm talking about is intended for people looking for their first or second job. If you've been working for 3-4 years already, a lot of this stuff is less important because you can lean on your experience, right? If you have like a really stellar resume, you can cut some other corners. But if you're just starting out, you don't have a really impressive resume, you don't have a CS degree, a computer science degree. These are some of the things that I think can help stand out from the pack, especially now, given that there is, so much more competition than there was a couple of years ago. There's fewer roles. I think this is where these things can really help out. The next bullet point I have is about a portfolio site. And this is one of those things, when I used to coach students, I would hear like, why not just submit my GitHub page? Like, why do I need to build a specific portfolio website? Like, who's actually going to look at this? And I do think it really matters. It can be a bit of a secret weapon, because when you create a portfolio site, and in my mind, the portfolio site is a tool you can use to guide the person reading it through your most impressive work, to showcase the things that you've done, the problems that you've solved. And most people, when they build a portfolio, it looks something like this, where you have my projects. You have the name of a project, you have a screenshot, you have the technologies used, React, Redux, Node, you have 2 sentences, and then you have a link to the GitHub project, right? This is what 99% of developer portfolios look like. And the problem with that is it doesn't actually tell the reader anything about like who you are, why you built this project, what sorts of obstacles you had to overcome in building this project. And that's really like what makes it interesting and personal. Like, in general, there's 2 different groups of people that are going to be looking at a portfolio site. There's the people that are like working in HR, that are specifically like their job is hiring and doing sort of company management. They're probably not software developers themselves, but they're hiring for developer positions. And then there's also developers, like senior developers at the company, who are involved in hiring. And for both of those groups, you want to show more than just a screenshot, a list of technologies, and a link to a GitHub. You want to kind of guide the reader through what you did, like what problems you ran into, how you overcame them. And I have an example here of a portfolio site that I think does a really, really good job. This is Julia, and she sort of transitioned a little bit into a design plus engineering role, but when I first included this portfolio, she was strictly a developer. And what I really like about what she's done is that you have all of this information. So like you click on a project, there's a whole page about it. There's screenshots, there's my role, so showing what this person specifically did. There's, and granted, like I said, she's leaned into design more. So now some of this isn't quite as applicable as it had been a couple of years ago when I first discovered her portfolio site, but it still really shows the level of detail that I think can be really helpful for someone getting to know who you are and what you've done. And the most common and frankly not totally unreasonable pushback to this that I hear is nobody's going to spend the time to read all this, right? Nobody's spending the 10 minutes it would take to actually go through this and read every word. And frankly, this probably is a little bit long. You wouldn't necessarily want it to be this long. But that doesn't, like, someone might spend 30 seconds skimming it and they'll still get the gist, right? They'll see the screenshots, they'll see that you mention, like maybe at some point, and again, this is not exactly as relevant for developers, but maybe one of the things that you write, what is this application that I'm looking at? Movie theater case study. Like maybe you'll talk about how like one of the things was to interface with the ticketing system, right? Like you want to be able to sell tickets. And I only know the brands here in Canada. I don't know if they're international, but like Cineplex Odeon is one of our big theater brands, or AMC, I think, is one that's more international. You might think like, well, okay, if I want to build a thing to help AMC sell tickets, I have to interface with their API. Maybe they have a really weird API and you have to massage it. Details like that show the developers who are looking at your project that like you really know your stuff, like you've actually gone and built something. You're not, because this is the problem. When you only have a screenshot, two lines, and tags, like the technology stacks, nobody knows how much you've actually done, like whether this was something you did in a tutorial project and you've sort of made minimal tweaks. Something like this is a way to show that like you actually have done something concrete. And even if it's not like the most ambitious project in the world, you can still really do a very, like that's what I say, like showcasing, right? You want to show the person what the most impressive parts of the thing that you've built. Because if all you do is include a GitHub link, even a developer is like not going to have the time to go through and read line by line. And if they do, they might see the uninteresting parts, the easy parts. They won't see the like really challenging problem that you had to solve. So portfolio sites are a really good way to highlight that. And even if like 75% of employers never follow the link to your portfolio site, think about the impact that you'll have on the 25% who do. And because there's sort of this prevailing wisdom that it's not worth spending time on the portfolio site because nobody reads them, it means that not many people create them, right? Like one of the things I like to do when I'm working with students and trying to come up with like a strategy is to figure out like what can we do that isn't like a ridiculous amount of effort, like getting a computer science degree or finding a way to get 2 years of experience. What can we do in like a couple of weeks that will make you better than 95% of the people applying in this one area, right? If we can give you a portfolio site that's 95% better than most people, you can write a cover letter that's 95% better. This is important when you have a job application or a job position that has 100 applicants. Something like this, I think, can be really useful. Play into your strengths. So a few years ago, I tweeted this thing. If you work as a developer and don't have a college degree, I'd love to hear the story of how you got your first job. What convinced employers to take a chance on you? And I tweeted this and I got hundreds and hundreds of responses. And I went through all the replies and I sort of categorized them. And what I learned is that every story is like a snowflake, like they're all totally different. And so I sort of tried to come up with loose categories that I could fit people in. The most common category that I heard was side projects and freelancing. I heard referrals and community. I heard transition from an adjacent field, getting an internship, or starting your own business. And if you add all these numbers up, you'll discover they add up to more than 100%. Oh, there's also personality and skill set, which is my bucket category for everything else, like something that didn't quite fit into any of the others. They add up to more than 100% because sometimes people would mention multiple things. Like, yeah, I got a referral from my friend, but I also had a couple of years freelancing experience. So in this blog post, this one apparently doesn't exist anymore, but I compiled a list of some of the stories that I heard. And like I say, they're all totally unique. Like everybody that does this seems to have their own sort of narrative about the thing that they did that worked. And my takeaway from this wasn't like, it's not like you should go and do all these things because there's too many things for anybody to do, but it's that everybody followed a strategy that worked for them based on their own strengths. I did a coding bootcamp in 2014. And one of the things the coding bootcamp people really impressed on us was that it was important to network. And the best way to network was to go to events. And in Toronto, where I lived at the time, there was Rails Pub Night, which was you go to a bar with a bunch of other Rails developers and you network and you get to know them and then they give you a job. That's the idea, right? So I would go to these Rails pub nights and I don't like bars. I don't like loud noises. I don't drink. So none of this was a good atmosphere for me. And I would sit on my own with my bottle of water. And every now and then I would talk to somebody, but I was miserable in the environment and I was probably a miserable person to chat with. And like, I didn't get any jobs from that. Like it probably, in retrospect, shouldn't have been surprising that that didn't help because it was just not the strategy for me, right? Like that's never going to work for me because that's not my personality. That's not my vibe. That's not my scene. What did work for me was side projects. Like I had a lot of fun building stuff. And so I would build things and share them online. And after a couple of years of building things, I got pretty good at it. And it was really like that was the lever that I was able to pull that really worked for me. So I think it's always important. Like don't follow the advice that you're getting. And I think I said this earlier, which is like, even if that advice comes from me, don't follow advice if it doesn't seem, like everybody has their own story. And I think this thing that I did really sort of showcases that there's a million different roads. And rather than invest your time and energy in a thing that, like, don't swim against the current, right? Like find the way that kind of works naturally for you. Yeah, I think I've covered those things. This is something that one of my instructors at the bootcamp I went to told me, and actually they did a thing which I will recreate because I think it's worthwhile. They showed that, and this is like a JavaScript recreation of Microsoft Paint, which I think is really cool. He would graph this thing, And this is time, and this is how much you learn at a job. So maybe this is 1 year, this is 2 year, this is 3 year, this is 4 year. When you work at a job, in general, and there's exceptions, but in general, when you first start the job, you're learning a lot, right? You're learning all this new stuff, you're overwhelmed, you're learning things, and then you sort of get used to what's going on. And eventually you really don't learn that much, right? At that point, you're just using the skills that you've developed. And what he told us was, if you're trying to optimize for your own personal growth to get better quicker, you don't want to leave a job here, right? Like if you leave here, you've had all of this time where you weren't learning as quickly as you should. You should leave a job like here, like after a couple of years. And not only is this a good way, because, you know, when you get that new job, let me pick a different color. When you start a new job, you'll start from here and you'll have a similar sort of trajectory. And you can do this again and again and again, leaving jobs, getting new jobs, right? Working with new technologies, learning new skills. If your goal is to become really good at this, this is a really good way to do it. It's also a really good way to make a lot of money. Like generally, you make more money from getting a new job offer with your now like more impressive resume than you would just from the annual promotion cycles at jobs. So whether your goal is to make a lot of money or to get really good at the craft, I think either way, it sort of helps. You have the same sort of the strategy that I think works well for most people in most situations in North America, from what I know. I think the pushback that I get from this is, won't it look bad? Like, won't employers say, like, you know, they look at your resume, you work here for 2 years, here for 2 years, here for 2 years. You're just going to work here for 2 years, and maybe the employer doesn't want to hire somebody that's only going to be there for a couple of years. And that's just not really been my experience, nor has it been the experience of people I talk to. And I'm talking here at Women Who Code. I should make explicit the fact that, like, there's a privilege that I have as a man in tech that not everybody enjoys. And so I really want to be careful not to encourage people to do things that may, you know, that prejudice might get in the way of. But I've spoken to people of all different backgrounds, of all different genders, and I haven't spoken to many people who have raised this as a thing that has happened to them in terms of they moved around a lot, and then they found it harder to get a job as a result. Now, granted, I'm saying it like 1 to 2 years, right? Especially like at first. It's a different story if you have 3 months, 4 months, 1 month, 5 months. Like if you have a bunch of really short stints like that, then yeah. Because, you know, if we go back to this graph, did I keep it open? Yeah, like if you keep leaving when you're in this sort of phase, it isn't worth it to the employer because you're spending all that time getting trained. But if you leave after a couple of years, you spent like all this time really contributing to the code base. And I think if you go back and ask the people I've worked for, my old managers, they wouldn't regret hiring me because I left after a couple of years. And because it's sort of normalized again in North America, it's not really a thing that looks bad. It's sort of the way that it goes. It's built in to the expectations. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that? No, I guess not. And again, any questions people have, I'm happy to talk at the end. Networking. I touched on this a little bit, right? The Rails pub night and the misery I had trying to go to a place that I wasn't comfortable. I think when people hear the word networking, that's what you think of. You think of the events, the in-person events, right? The cocktail hours, all the different things. And it can be that. That is, you know, networking is this big universe, and that is one thing within that. But it's all sorts of other things, right? Like in my mind, networking just means building connections, and there's lots of different ways to do that. There's going to these local events, there's going to conferences, there's hanging out in developer communities online, which right now is kind of tricky because Twitter has historically been where developers hung out, and now Twitter's a whole thing. But you know, LinkedIn is a great spot as well. Threads, there's different like online developer communities. There's even like Discord groups and Slack communities that I think are really cool. Like there's Reactiflux in the React community. Joining these spaces can be really useful. It's a way to meet people, to make friends, to build connections. I think the thing to keep in mind with this is that, like, if the only thing you do in these communities is ask questions, and it's the most natural thing in the world, right? You join a community, you're working on a thing, you get stuck on something, you're going to want help for that, so you're going to ask. But if that's the only thing that you do, like your only purpose in the community is to seek help when you need it, it's not really going to build many connections for you because you haven't helped anybody else, right? You also want to be in the community answering other people's questions. Like when you see someone ask something that you know the answer to, take the time to, like, you know, answer their question, create a little code pen that kind of shows, like do what you can to really provide value to the people in these communities. And that way, when you're looking for a job, they'll remember like, oh, that person really helped me out. Let me like put in a good word for them. So I think that's a really good, again, you can still ask questions, just don't exclusively ask questions. Another thing is learning in public, right? So a lot of people, as they're learning, they'll write a blog post, they'll film a YouTube video that sort of shows themselves learning this thing. In my courses, I encourage people to stream themselves. Well, I don't encourage people, but if people ask, I have no problem with it, to stream themselves going through the course, because I think it's really valuable for people to see how you learn. And this isn't necessarily like the employer isn't going to see that you're streaming on Twitch and offer you a job, but it's a way to make friends with other developers, right? To build those sort of relationships. I think that's just about what yeah, this is my last real slide. And I want to briefly touch on the things that I've learned about learning. So I have this blog post, how to learn stuff quickly, which is like a big set of tips that I've learned just from my own experience. I have this book. Is it over here? I think it is. I'll knock a bunch of things out of the way. Make It Stick is a book on education, which really is just like the best compilation I found of all the different things that I've learned about how to learn effectively. So if you want to learn how to learn, very good book. Make It Stick. It's by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel. Is that actually right? It doesn't sound right now that I've said it. I guess it is. Make It Stick, you'll find it. This blog post has a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to get into. But again, if you have questions, I'm happy to talk about them. But the thing that I want to highlight is the mindset cultivation. This is something I learned when I was at Khan Academy, because Khan Academy, if you're not familiar, is a nonprofit that has a bunch of like, well, they're most well known for their math content. So like kindergarten to grade 12 math content, but they have a bunch of stuff now. And one of the things that they really try to get across in that platform is that your mindset with this is so important. Like if you go into learning with the attitude that you want to be good at this right away, and if you're not good at it right away, it's a character flaw. It means that you're not smart enough to do this. It means that it's just, you're not cut out for it. These are the sort of like negative self-talk things that can almost guarantee that you're not going to be successful at something, because unless you happen to have like the 0.1%, the top of the bell curve in terms of natural talent, it is going to be a struggle. Like that's just sort of the way it goes. And if you can get yourself to understand that you learn more through struggling than you do through succeeding, right? Like those times where you're learning something and you don't understand and you're trying, it's not working, you're getting error messages you don't understand, you're Googling the error messages, you don't understand the explanation, you're getting frustrated. This is actually like extremely effective learning, because you're learning a bunch of like incidental stuff. Like maybe you're not learning the solution to your problem, the answer to your question, but you're learning so much along the way. And when I think back to like the periods where I've grown a lot in a short amount of time, it's where I was really challenging myself. Now, granted, there is, it has to be the right level of challenge. There is such a thing as being too challenged, like giving yourself something that's too advanced, too hard. But the sweet spot is much higher than we think it is. It feels good when you don't have these struggles, right? When you're effortlessly blowing through it, you know the answer already, you're solving the problems, you're not getting errors, but you're also not learning anything, right? You're stagnating if that's your experience. So I do think that like the most effective thing I've done for myself is to reframe those experiences. When I'm trying to learn a new language, and right away I hit an error and the error doesn't make sense to me, and the tooltip, there's a TypeScript tooltip and it's a bunch of nonsense, and you get frustrated, and my brain starts to go to the place of like, well, maybe this isn't for me, like I shouldn't be doing this. And the realization was to tell yourself like, no, like hold on now. This is just, everybody has this experience, right? Unless you're a prodigy, the experience is hitting walls and getting stuck and being frustrated. And it's through these processes that we actually grow as developers. All right. Well, I didn't want to do that. That's cool. I can zoom in on shapes. I don't know why you would want to, but cool. That's my talk, or my slides. I included links to all the stuff that I showed here, and I'll share the link to these slides with the organization. So I wonder what the best way to do that is. I'll put the link to the slides in the chat right now so that anybody who wants it can grab it. I think this will work. Let me know if it doesn't. And yeah, that's my talk.
Wow, thank you very much, Josh. It's such a great opportunity to learn from your wealth of experience and knowledge and being able to share with us. We are so grateful. We have a couple of questions in a Q&A that I'd like to go through so that you answer. I'll take it one after the other so that we can get the best out of it. So, yeah, first question from Lisa said, you mentioned that there is a person on the other end of your resume. I thought everyone was running them through automated AI processing first nowadays. Can you speak to that?
Yes, and that's a great question or a great observation. Most of the companies that I've worked for have been on the smaller side. So I mentioned I was at Unsplash. We had no automated screening because we were a 7-person company. Like it didn't make sense. But I've also worked for DigitalOcean, and DigitalOcean was a 600-person company. I've never worked for like a Google or a Microsoft or company with tens of thousands. And I imagine those companies do rely a lot more on automation. But even if that's true, right? Even if it's and this is why like the advice you hear is to make sure to list keywords on your resume. Like make sure you mention React if you have React experience. That's still only the first hurdle. Like if you get over the automated resume screener, then it goes to a person, right? There is no job process that I'm aware of where you go from initial application to offer without a human taking the time to get to know you and to understand. And really the goal, I didn't say this either, the goal of a cover letter, the goal of a portfolio site is to get your interview, the first interview. That's where that will help you, right? A cover letter won't help you get a job, but it will help you land an interview. And then the interview helps you get the job. So, you know, there will be cases, and that I also didn't really touch on resumes because it's not like a thing I know a ton about. I would definitely defer to others who know how to get past automated resume screeners and all that. But you know, it's still important to have these personalized touches because otherwise, when it does get to a person, you're not going to stand out from the 75 other resumes that they have with roughly the same experience, right?
Yeah, yeah. Wendy is also asking, she says she's a full stack bootcamp grad with construction engineer background. Her question is how she can make her cover letter outstanding in combining both construction engineer skills and full stack bootcamp skills as well.
That's so cool. This is actually, so I mentioned I taught at a boot camp, and the boot camp had full-time programs, 9 to 10 weeks, and part-time programs that were 8 months. The really cool thing about the part-time program was that it was mostly people who were transitioning from another career. Like the full-time program was a lot of people in their early 20s who just came out of school or have had like short careers. People in the part-time program, they're in the part-time program because they have like families and lives and jobs. And often there's people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who have like a significant amount of experience in whatever career they came from. In terms of like how to make that experience relevant, it's going to be really dependent on the company you're applying to. But certainly like construction engineering, I don't know anything about it, but it sounds like it would have a good amount of overlap. And so I would try to find the way to do that. The other thing is that it really depends on the company that you're applying to, right? Like if you're applying to a company that is in the construction industry, then that's like huge. Like you definitely want to lean into the experience that you have. If you're applying to like, I don't know what the opposite would be. But you know, like it's always going to be figuring out the best way to make your experience relevant. But certainly it is. Like I think that it's people that have significant careers before transitioning to tech do have this advantage of like you've worked in a team before, right? You especially like an engineering position. There's going to be a lot of really valuable stuff, and it's just finding a way to make that. And I wish I had like a more concrete answer, but I don't. I would have to like really sit with it and puzzle that through. But certainly, I think it's worth trying.
Yeah. So finding the balance is the best. Yeah. Another Lisa is asking that is it best practice to have the same projects featured on your GitHub and also on your portfolio? Is the redundancy not an issue for this?
No, I wouldn't think it's an issue. And actually, that's a good point. I recommend on the portfolio site having between 2 and 5 projects. And for a lot of people, you might have 15 projects and you think, well, why would I only put 5? Like I have so many. But the thing is, nobody's going through 15 projects, right? Like nobody has the time for that. They'll check 1, maybe 2. And if you list 15, then the risk is that they go into your least impressive one, right? The smallest one, the least ambitious one. But yeah, in terms of whether there's a redundancy there, I wouldn't worry. I would think that you'd want to have the same projects highlighted, because that way, no matter which angle someone takes, they get to your most impressive work.
Yeah, yeah. Great answer. Mary's asking, how does one know they have a killer portfolio?
I actually, and this is a weird transition, but I wrote a book about this. It's 80 something pages. It's free. I'll put a link to that in the chat, because I do think it's like, and I'll even, please don't share this link outside this group, because typically the link asks for your email and you join my newsletter. I'm not going to ask you to do that. This link goes straight to the download page. Just please don't share this link outside the group. But yeah, this book kind of goes through in much more depth than I would be able to here to kind of show what I think makes a really good portfolio site. The short version is that it should be a really good showcase of the work that you've done. So it should highlight your most impressive projects. You should avoid skill bars. Like, you shouldn't say like, I'm 8 out of 10 JavaScript, 9 out of 10 CSS, because like the thing with that is that everyone has their own scale. And like, if you're early in your career and you say that you're 9 out of 10 JavaScript, people aren't going to find it credible, right? Like, that's saying that you're like, people that I would think have 9 out of 10 have had like 20 years of experience and they know the language at a fundamental level. But if you put 3 out of 10, which might be more accurate, then like other people are going to look at that and say like, it's not very high. So just omit that entirely. You can list the languages that you've used, just don't assign a rating, is my advice.
All right, thank you for the free book too. Okay, move on to the next question. Yeah. So I think another Lisa is asking the same thing, what we think are the best talking points in your portfolio. So Lisa saying you can use the link over there to download the book. Okay, so the full link will be posted. Someone is asking if the full link will be posted on YouTube. The full recording, yes, the full recording will be posted on YouTube. Yes, Egil is asking, what suggestion do you have for people who have been off work for years, like a family break, or are totally new to development?
That is a great question, and I wish I had a great answer. I can, like, when you're in the room with somebody, I think that it's the kind of thing you can explain, right? Just, say that you started a family, like you've been raising a child or doing whatever it is. Like, it's absolutely understandable, and I think most people will understand it. The trouble is getting to that interview, like having the opportunity to explain, because if all you submit is a resume that has a 5-year gap in it, maybe some people will kind of wonder about that, or maybe it will be enough to not have you get the interview. I don't think it should be, and I don't even know that it is. Like, maybe that's not the way it works. Certainly, like when I was involved in hiring, we wouldn't consider gaps. Like, I've been involved in hiring most significantly at Unsplash. I ran it, but I've been part of the pipeline at Khan Academy, at DigitalOcean, and it's never something that we that even became like within our awareness. Like, especially like most people, like I was the developer pulled in, and I wasn't really going through the resume. I wish I had more of an answer, because I think that like I say, right, there is a way to handle that conversation. The trick is just getting to have that conversation. I was also going to say earlier, this isn't quite related, but it has to do with what I was talking about in terms of jumping jobs really frequently. So if you have a lot of short stints, the thing that I would have said if anybody asked was, I tried a really small company, I tried a bigger company. As a newer person, I'm trying to find the right kind of company for me. And I think that company name that I'm applying to has the balance of attributes I'm looking for. That's like the way I would, the marketing angle, or the way that I would position that. And I think similarly, there's a way to position the fact, I wouldn't say I've been out of work for 5 years. I would say I've been working on these other things, right? Whether that's raising a child or just whatever you've been doing. Just make clear that you've been busy with things. I wish I had a better answer, but that's what I have.
I think that's a great answer. Let's move on to the next question. People wanted to find out how they can find people to build. So ideas on any platform to build projects, and how to choose a project, and also, basically that.
It's a great question. And it's also a question that I answer in more depth in that portfolio book, which I saw someone wonder where the link was. It's in the webinar chat. But I'll answer it here as well. The most important thing is that it's something you are interested in. So if you have any like non-coding hobbies, like for myself, one of the first things I built, and I knocked one over earlier, I wonder if I can find it now. Yeah, I have a yo-yo because I used to yo-yo. I guess I still do. And the thing with high-end yo-yos is that there's a bunch of them and they have, like, people get really serious about the stats, like the weight, the diameter, the width. So I built a tool that had like a radar graph that would let me compare different yo-yos that a company made. And, you know, this isn't something that like no company is going to look at this and say like, that's exactly what we need. Like that's the thing we have. But it's a project that I built that I was really enthusiastic about. And I could convey that enthusiasm when showing somebody it. It's also because I was enthusiastic about it, I found the time to work on it, right? It's hard to, like, especially if you have a whole life, it's difficult to motivate yourself to put in the time to build the side project. If it's something you really care about, that's going to be a huge advantage. Like you're going to find the time, you're going to make the effort if it's something you care about. If you can't think of anything, and I'll give you a couple more examples before I move on. I built a tool to help me track TV shows that I liked because I was sick of like wondering if a TV show was off the air or when the new episodes were going to come out. So I built a tool that had a calendar that showed me when new shows and I could mark them as seen. I did a similar thing for books. So if a new author came out with a book, I made it easy for me to be notified about that. Little like scratching your own itch, right? Building the little tool that you wish existed is a great way to do this. If you don't have anything like that, you can see if anybody in your family or your friend group needs something, right? Like a lot of students that I worked with would like one student I'm thinking of, his sister was a hairdresser. And so we built like a hairdressing website, like a website for people to make appointments and see her services. And that can be really satisfying too, because it can be more, especially like depending on who you are, the type of person you are. For a lot of people, it's more motivating to build something for someone than for yourself. So that's like, you can ask around to see if anybody needs anything. I think so those are the first two things I would prioritize. The third thing is like, think about what kind of job you're trying to get to. Like for a while, I really wanted to work at Spotify, the music company. And so I built a tool using Spotify's API, which again, goes into like the amount of effort you put into an application. That was a really high effort. I spent a weekend building a tool that would allow you to like, and essentially I just grabbed one Spotify feature and made a whole application about it where you put in an artist name and it would pull 3 related artists and show them one on top of the other. And you can click on that artist and it would pull to the center and then you get 3 more related artists. So a way to like find new music essentially through Spotify's recommendation system. I applied with that project and I got an interview very quickly, and it didn't work out because they wanted me to move to Sweden and I wasn't, or at least I shouldn't make it sound like I turned down the interview, the first interview, because I found out that they would require me to move to Sweden and it wasn't something I could pull off logistically. But it definitely helped me get that interview, which I think a lot of people are hesitant to like commit that much, right? Like, are you saying I should spend 20 hours building something for one application when maybe that company won't even still be hiring by the time I finish the application? But the point is that like that would have been a really good portfolio project either way. Like it's not like if it doesn't work with Spotify, then I throw this thing in the garbage. It's still a cool project that can help me out with any company. So those would be the 3 things that I would try to like prioritize on.
All right, thank you very much, Josh. Another question too that was in the chat mainly was about getting entry-level jobs in this era where it's difficult to find like even senior roles. So how can people position themselves for entry-level jobs, basically? Yeah.
That's like the big question, right? Like it is. The past couple of years, or maybe the past year, has been really tough because there have been all these layoffs at big companies, which means there's way more people looking for jobs. But the thing is, there's no like senior developer factory. Like I heard this person that sells used cars talk about this. Like no company makes used cars, right? The only way to get a used car is for someone to buy a new car and drive it around for a couple of years and then sell it to them. The only way to get a senior developer is to hire a junior developer and have them work for a few years. So there will always be jobs for junior developers because otherwise there just won't be developers after like a decade. And, you know, companies have smaller budgets. Senior developers tend to be really expensive, which means it's hard to hire them. So there's always going to be opportunities. The challenge, and what everyone's kind of learning, is that means instead of having 20 or 30 other people, there's 150 other people applying for the same jobs. which is really discouraging and can be really frustrating. I think most of the things I went over in this talk are ways to help with that, like writing a really good cover letter. What was the other things? Building a project that uses a company's API, networking, right? Getting referrals. All the stuff I talked about in this talk really are things that I think can help get building a portfolio site, get like a little bit of an edge. And that's really what it's about, right? Like if you have 150 applications or 150 people applying, maybe like 20 will get interviews. And so how can you position yourself to be one of the 20 people that stand out from? And I think the worst way to do that is to like use automated tools that fire off the same application to everybody to do the copy paste cover letter, because then like why would somebody, like they have 149 other people, like give them a reason to prioritize you and to see if you'd be a good fit and to get you to an interview. So yeah, I think just all the stuff I talked about will help with that to a degree, although again, I don't want to overpromise, right? It doesn't mean that if you follow all this stuff, you're guaranteed to get a bunch of interviews, just that I think these are the things that you only need one, right? You only need one company to be inspired by your cover letter or your portfolio site. And then the first job is always the hardest. The second one's easier. The third one's easier than that. So it's just about like the perseverance to find that one company that is looking for what you have and to make yourself stand out a little bit more in the process.
All right, thank you. Whilst you're still talking about entry-level jobs, Rosine is asking if there are entry-level role titles that you should look out for and be applying to.
That is a good question. I should also say, more caveats. And it was mentioned in the intro that I've been doing the solo course creator thing since 2020. So I actually haven't, I still talk to plenty of people that are looking for jobs, but I haven't been as active in it myself, which means I don't actually know what the current trends, like I know even Julia's portfolio site I showed was UX engineer, which is a job title that didn't exist a few years ago, but has become really popular. What I can say is that when I was applying for jobs, you'd almost never, and even when I was applying for junior developer jobs, junior developer is a very rare thing to see in a job title. Like I'm sure you've all experienced that. Like there's just not many of them. What there are software developer jobs that require 2 to 3 years of experience. And when people say 2 to 3 years of experience, that's like that's what they want. If you have no experience, but you have a really good package and they think that you'd be a really good, because even if you have 2 or 3 years of experience, you're not really a senior developer yet. There is like title inflation where some people have the title of senior developer after a couple of years. But it takes longer than that. Like it's going to take a few years before you really can solve problems in the way to really build things that scale well, right? To be able to like contribute to the architecture of a project. You have to sort of go through a lot of growing pains to get to that point, which means that someone with 2 years of experience and someone with no experience, they're both going to fit in the same sort of shape of a role, which is ideally you have more senior people that are expected to spend some amount of time mentoring them. And there's going to be more mentoring with someone with no experience than someone with 2 years of experience. But it's the same sort of shape, right? Like it's, they're both circles. They're just slightly different. One's more oblong than the other. This is a weird analogy, but hopefully it makes sense. Very slightly different shapes, but in the same sort of general, you're filling the same spot that you need. And a good team should have more junior developers than senior developers. And by junior, I mean anything from like 0 to 3 years of experience. Because there's a bunch of reasons for that actually, but the one that I think is most compelling is that junior developers really bring an energy that is helpful for everybody on the team. And they offer a way, like I've worked companies where most of the people have been senior, and it's so easy in that context to make the code much more complicated than it has to be. If you have juniors on your team, you're forced to write code that everybody on the team can understand, which means you write better code. So there's a lot of like actually good reasons for companies to hire junior developers. It's not only about like saving money from the employer's perspective, which is why I think there's always going to be demand for junior developers. Like I say, the tricky thing is that there's just not as many roles as there used to be. But yes, there's definitely like, I don't want anyone to think that like there aren't any demand for junior developer jobs, because there really is like a valuable position at companies.
Okay, thank you very much. Lisa is also asking if you have any tips for planning out a project and budgeting time.
Yeah, I mean, so I wish, like, Lisa, if you're still here, I'm curious to know if you mean in the context of like working alone or working on a team. I'll assume you mean working alone, and like assuming that you're meaning to like build out your portfolio as a way to help you land a job. And it is like really
Yeah,
tricky, right? Like for myself, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think she was talking about building side projects in your portfolio, so working on her own.
Got it. Yeah, for myself, I found that if I tried to do any of that after work, it was not going to happen. Like there was just no way, right? And I don't like I am already extremely like on the in terms of like how busy, how flexible your schedule is. I was already super flexible because I don't have kids. I don't really have anybody that depends on me. And even with like all of that luxury in terms of time, I just could not get myself to work. You know, you're at work from 9 to 5, you get home at 6. There was no way in the world I was going to start working on my side project then. And so what I started doing was getting up at 6 and spending the first couple hours of my day on side projects. And that was really, for myself, they're my best hours. And so like, I could get more done in those 2 hours than I would be able to do at my day job in like 4 hours. So I was selfishly keeping my best hours for myself. So that's like an option. Weekends are an option. In terms of like strategies in terms of budgeting and planning, I'm not like an expert. Like I use Trello for my organization. I think that's as sophisticated as a tool as you need, right? Just some way that if you have an idea, you have a place to jot it down. But yeah, and like this, it sort of reminds me of what I was saying earlier about there's 100 different stories from 100 different people about how they got their first job. There's 100 different ways to organize your time. And ultimately, I think the most important thing is to find the thing that works for you personally, rather than like like the guru says I have to get up at 5 a.m. So let me get up at 5 a.m. even if I'm like maybe you're a night owl and maybe your brain does not work in the morning and you find it easier to work at 7 p.m. or work at midnight. Like all of that is fine. It's just about finding whatever works more naturally for you.
Exactly. We'll take our last question from Malice. She's asking, what if you don't know React yet? What's the best way to start? Should we jump to start working on projects?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that like the generic advice that I have, which will not work for everybody, but I think will work for the greatest number of people, is to start with JavaScript. Once you're comfortable with functions, with executions, like if you can, like just look at a random problem, like write a function that takes an array and filters out numbers that are greater than 20, and then it's hard to come up with examples on the spot, but like the sort of code challenges you see on websites like Hacker Rank, is that one of them? There's these like challenge websites. Once you're comfortable enough with the language to be able to solve those sorts of problems, that's when I think the best time to start with React is. If you start with React when you're brand new to JavaScript, it's going to be a lot because you're not going to understand which parts are JavaScript and which parts are React. I would also say TypeScript is very popular nowadays. I would suggest not starting with TypeScript, or at least there's two avenues, right? You can learn JavaScript, then learn TypeScript, then learn React, or you can learn JavaScript, then React, then TypeScript. I would not suggest learning React and TypeScript at the same time because, again, TypeScript tends to be the kind of thing that like takes a lot, like it throws a lot of wrenches at you. It's good. It sort of like reminds me of like the really critical coworker that's like giving you the nitpick feedback every time you do anything. And that's great when you're comfortable and you're trying to get really good at something, but it's overwhelming when you're like, I don't even understand what this code is doing. And this friggin' thing is yelling at me because my type isn't. Like, make your life simpler, focus on one at a time. So I'd say like the optimal path in my mind, bit of JavaScript until you can solve typical challenging problems, types of things, challenge problems, then React, then TypeScript. Again, you can always switch the order around between React and TypeScript, or maybe there are like, maybe for some people it does work better to learn them all at the same time. If that were what works better for you, then that's great. I would suggest, like I know I saw someone earlier mention the Odin project, which isn't an organization I know anything about, but I've looked through some of their curriculum and I think it's as solid as any other bootcamp curriculum. But that would be like a really good piece of advice because it's like a whole world out there and it's very easy to get overwhelmed if you just try to learn everything. Finding a curriculum that has like, module 1, module 2, here's what, just like that structure is really helpful because until like when you're starting out, you don't know what you need to know and there's a million things to know. So I think finding a curriculum, even if it's not the ideal curriculum, like it can be like a so-so curriculum, it's still going to be so much better than having no curriculum because, you're learning important things either way. And then once you get to the point where you do have, like you feel like you're on solid footing, then you can really focus on the things that you care most about, or that you think are most important, or that you think would be most helpful in the job hunt. But at first, it's just a matter of like getting your bearings and getting a foundation.
All right. Thank you very much, Josh. We really appreciate the time. We enjoyed the session. We are so grateful that you could come, and we hope that we'll see you sometime very soon.